What's up YouTube, Fat Tony Gaming coming at you today with another deck profile, this time going over one of my absolute favorite clans in the game, and that is Dimension Police. This is actually the clan I started playing the game with all the way back in Break Ride era, and this is one of the most fun decks I've ever played. I love this deck to death. I've been tinkering with it ever since the Viera support came out with Asia Circuit with the busted Commander Laurel, which is just stupidly good with all of the Dimension Police strides, especially Bravest Peak Excalib, making him insane, swinging for huge numbers and extra crit on your first stride, as well as being able to get your restand first stride. So with that being said, let's get right into the deck profile. Starting up by my starter, I use Viera Dimensional Robo Goyusha. Some decks I've seen suggest running the original Goyusha because you can get the superior ride to grade 3, which, while that is very powerful in premium format with the new stride rules, this deck really wants to dig for its combo pieces to get those Commander Laurel abilities off as soon as possible, so I prefer to run Goyusha to get that immediate card draw. And also this deck can sometimes have an issue with Soul, so that one extra card in Soul guaranteed, as opposed to with the old Goyusha needing 3 other dimensional robo cards. It can be a little iffy, and another reason that we don't run the old Goyusha as well is because it requires at minimum 3 other dimensional robo cards, and while we do run a good amount of dimensional robo cards, we don't run enough that it would be something that would be able to get off consistently. And then on top of that, they're just cards that we don't want to shove into the soul for no reason, even though it would give us a big tempo swing. So now let's move on to the grade 3. Starting off, I run 4 copies of Viera Super Dimensional Robo Dayusha. So he's got 2 abilities. Continuous, if his power is 35k or more, he gains a critical, and then he has a once per turn axe skill, or you can choose any number of your rear guards and rest them, and then for every rear guard that you rested, he gains 10,000 power. So this is really good for early game pressure. If you go first, riding up to him, if you choose to commit some stuff to board, you can have him be swinging for big numbers and an extra crit, which pressures your opponent, putting them on a back pedal because now they're even closer to being dead. So now that just makes all of your further attacks later on down the line that much more lethal. And also, if you get Commander Laurel out on the field, he can swing for 3 crit, which is already half your opponent's total damage allowed, and then God forbid you hit any critical triggers to add even more to it. I've actually put some people from 0 to 5 with this card, which is hilarious. Now moving on, our next grade 3, we run 4 copies of Ultimate Dimensional Robo Great Dayusha, the Viera version. Honestly, he's really running here for one reason and one reason alone, and that's the force marker. If it wasn't for the force gift marker, he probably wouldn't be in this deck. Yes, his on place is potentially very good in certain situations, but those situations rarely come up, unfortunately, and his superior ride ability is just not very relevant in premium because you're not normally on a grade 3, and if you are on a grade 3, something went horribly wrong. So like I said, basically he's just there for the force marker. And then last but not least, I run 10 grade 3s in this deck, and my last 2 are 2 Mass Police Leader Silbard. Mass Police Leader Silbard, his continuous ability says if your Vanguard's power is 30,000 or greater, he gets 5,000 power and a critical on rearguard circle. Once you start striding, your Vanguard is always going to be 30k or greater, period. The second you ride into something with a force marker and then stride, your Vanguard is sitting at 38k base minimum for the turn. So he will always be an 18k attacker with an extra crit, and the crit pressure on rearguard is essential for this deck for some of its harder matchups for like Protect clans and stuff there. They can easily shut down your Vanguard. Your Vanguard's normally swinging with an extra crit, but now that you have a rearguard that you can pressure with an extra crit, just makes it that much better and that much more threatening to your opponent. So now moving on to the grade 2s. Run 4 copies of Dimensional Robo Die Dragon Viera. So, for those of you who don't know what he does, he has an axe skill on both Vanguard and Rearguard Circle at once per turn, Soul Blast 1, and one of your Vanguards gets 5,000 power until the end of the turn. That's good for helping us hit certain power thresholds during the end of the game, during the course of the game, and also allowing you to get certain pieces out of Soul that you want to have in your drop zone, which we'll get to later. And then he has a continuous ability on Rearguard that says if your Vanguard's power is 35,000 or greater, he gets 10,000 power. Like I had mentioned earlier, once you start striding, your Vanguard's 38,000 before any other modifiers. So he's almost always a 20k attacker on Rearguard, which is very good because it allows you to pressure with pressure against things. 20k is nothing to sneeze at, especially because we do run stand triggers in this deck. Being able to restand it force even more shield out of your opponent. That's also one of the reasons Silbard is so good, because swing with him with a crit and then you restand, and it just makes him that much more deadly. Next up, we have 4 copies of Miracle Dandy. So this deck does run a good amount of pre-Viera triggers, so our shield value is a little skewed. So having him in gives us more defensive options. This is really good against matchups like Ichitam, where you can't guard against certain things, or like Balam, where you can't guard with grade 1s or grade 0s, but hey, you can guard with a grade 2, and this is 15k shield. So that's really useful. And also he just makes a good interceptor, like I said, against Ichitam, thing like that. 28k, they need to either use something like Deer or hit all the triggers in order to make those toms count. And then he's just good for building up field with Commander Laurel. So, throwing him down and having him be an interceptor with Commander Laurel on the field is really good. And then last, we run 3 copies of Cosmic Hero Grand Hogan. Those of you who don't know what he does, he is auto, Generation Break 1, Counterblast 1 when he's placed on Rearguard Circle. If you have a Vanguard with Gallop in its card name, which generally you will once you start striding, you may pay the cost, and if you do, draw a card. And then if your Vanguard's power is 40,000 or greater, you countercharge 1, and he gains 4,000 power until the end of turn. Again, just to reiterate that when you're striding, your Vanguard's base power is always 38k. Because you ride, put the force marker on Vanguard, and then stride, 13k base plus the 15, and then on top of that, the 10k from the force marker. So you just need 2k power in order to make his countercharge and power gain effect live. He's great for filling the board for free because he just replaces himself in hand. He's great for digging for combo pieces like Commander Laurel. So that's just really good in general. And then, of course, him being a 13k attacker means he hits force bases, which can be a little tricky in premium because the older stuff is not fitted to hit those bases. So he's one of the few cards that just naturally can hit those 13k bases. And now we move on to our grade 1s. So we run 4 copies of the man himself, Commander Laurel. Counterblast 1, choose 4 of your rear guards and rest them, and if you do, choose one of your units. It gains power equal to its power, so double its power, and then it also gains a critical. He's the cornerstone of this deck. Without him, this deck would not be anywhere near as good as it is. Being able to just double something's power and give it a crit is insane. With cards like X Gallop, you can hit the threshold to restand on your first stride, whereas before you couldn't do that because the stuff that would allow you to get that big was limited to Generation Break 2, which unless you G-guarded first, going first, you wouldn't be able to get into. And then also, he can actually be used in some scenarios to double up your rearguard's power and give it a crit. And there's some scenarios which I'll go over in a little bit that can actually be really useful. But like this guy is literally the backbone of the deck. Without him, the deck does not function anywhere near as well as it does. So now moving on, we have 4 copies of Dimensional Robo Diebrave, Vieira. So he has 2 skills similar to Die Dragon. He has an axe skill on Vanguard and Rearguard, which is Soul Blast 1, and your Vanguard gets 5,000 power until the end of turn. Again, good for getting pieces out of Soul, good for also letting your Vanguard get to certain thresholds. And then he has an auto skill on Rearguard Circle. It says, when your Vanguard's attack hits a Vanguard, cost, put this unit into your Soul and draw a card. So he's good to, commit to board to build up for Commander Laurel. And then, you know, once your Vanguard hits with Commander Laurel out on the field, he can trade himself in for a card from your hand, so you're not overcommitting, and you're not negging to overcommit for Commander Laurel. And also, he's just good early game too. If you want to like ride up to grade 2 and throw him behind a Vanguard, and then swing at your opponent. If they no guard it, now you get to dig for more combo pieces, and I've done that quite a few times. And also, it helps to build soul, which, like I mentioned earlier, is something that this deck really has a hard time keeping, which is going to be relevant for this card coming up. So I run, last grade ones that I run 4 copies of Enigma Comb. I've seen a lot of lists running draw PGs. I've seen some lists running a 2-2 split. I have tried both variations, and I absolutely do not like them. I feel like running 4 Enigma Comb is where I am most comfortable personally. This is more player preference than anything, but in my meta, I do have things that I have to deal with that I can't deal with draw PGs, mainly Ichitam. And so, because he's a grade 1 PG, you can perfect guard Ichikishima, which makes your Ichitam matchups that much easier. And then his secondary skill is where he truly shines, his drop zone skill. So those of you who don't know what his drop zone skill is, it's a auto skill in the drop zone. It's Generation Break 2, Counterblast 1, Soul Blast 1. At the end of the battle that your Vanguard with the burst ability attacked, if that unit's power is 40,000 or greater, you may pay the cost. If you do, add this card from your drop zone to your hand. And then, if that unit's power was 45,000 or greater, countercharge 1. So he literally becomes, basically, you're almost always going to be at that threshold for that countercharge. So he essentially becomes Soul Blast 1, add this card from your hand, from your drop zone to your hand. That is insane. The amount of PG recursion that this deck can do is absurd, and because of that, it allows you to play things a little differently than other decks, where, you know, other decks would really not want to discard Enigma, their perfect guards. You don't really have that big of an issue with it with Enigma Comb. You can easily discard him to Struggle Stride, or, you know, if he's actually your primary ride target, because you want to ride him up and then ride something like Die Dragon, or call out a Die Brave and then Soul Blast him out to set him up so you can guarantee that PG grab later. So that's just, he's just overall so good for the deck. This might sound like it's stretching it a little bit, but I feel like he's almost on par with Ezras as far as recurable PGs go. I mean, he's not as good as Arca, I would say, because Arca is literally free. It's just buying 2 cards from your drop zone, one of them being another copy. But, you know, basically Soul Blast 1 to bounce it back from your drop zone to your hand, and you don't require multiple copies to do that, unlike things like Arca and Ezras. Is just so good, and it just gives you that little bit of extra defense, because this deck can be a little glass cannony, where it has to commit hard to board, but it can easily rebuild back its defense with card draw abilities and stuff, and this is one of the major ones. So now moving on to triggers, I run 6 crit, 4 heal with a 2-2 split with the Viera heals and the countercharge soul charge heals, and then I run 6 stand triggers, 4 Operator Girl Reika and 2 Operator Girl Linka. So as you saw, I do run 10 grade 3s in this deck, so that means Linka has a better odds of going off. So for those of you who don't know what Linka does, Linka is an axe skill on rearguard circle. It's burst, Generation Break 2. Put this unit into your soul. If you have a Vanguard whose power is 20,000 or greater, draw a card. And then if your Vanguard's power is 35,000 or greater, which it will be because, like I said, with striding, you're always 38k minimum. Your Vanguard gets an ability. It says Auto Vanguard Circle, Soul Blast 1. When your drive check reveals a grade 3 unit, you may pay the cost, and if you do, choose one of your opponent's units with cannot be hit ability on the Guardian Circle and nullify that ability. So Linka allows you to nullify PGs if you drive check grade 3s. So now it should be mentioned that Linka only gives the ability to burst Vanguard, but basically the only relevant stride in this deck has the burst ability, so we don't really have to worry about that requirement. At worst, she's +1 soul to cycle herself, so that's not always terrible, because again, soul is an issue with this deck. And then now the other stand that we run, Operator Girl Reika. For those of you who don't know what she does, she's an act skill on Rearguard Circle, Generation Break 1. Put this unit on top of your deck as the cost. Choose one of your Vanguards, and until its end of turn, it gets 4,000 power. And skill auto Vanguard Circle. When this unit attacks a Vanguard, if its power is 37,000 or greater, you draw a card and then shuffle your deck. The shuffle the deck is separate from the ability that it grants. So this is huge with our main stride, because our main stride is a restander, which means that Reika goes from a break even to a +1. And then one other thing I should note, that with both Linka and Reika, these cards are ideal targets to call onto the field with Commander Laurel, because they can free up their rearguard circles. So that means that you can commit cards for Commander Laurel and then trade them in very easily and be able to still apply pressure with extra rearguard attacks. Whereas the normal crutch with Commander Laurel is the fact that you have to give up at least one rearguard attack. So that's another thing that makes these really good. And then plus, just stand triggers naturally help to mitigate the cost of Commander Laurel resting your units. So, and like I said earlier, stand triggers with things like Die Dragon and Silbard are just really good, being able to restand your beat sticks or your crit pressure units. So now, moving on to the G Zone, are basically only relevant stride in the G Zone. Bravest Peak X-Gallop. Bravest Peak X-Gallop, for those of you who don't know what he does, he is an auto ability. Once per turn, Vanguard Circle, Counterblast 1, choose a face-down card from your G-Zone and turn it face up. When this unit attacks, you might pay the cost. If you do, if his power is 40,000 or greater, he gets Drive +1. And then at the end of the battle that he attacked, if his power is 80,000 or greater, stand him and he gets Drive -4. So this is your main pressure card. This is your main stride, because this thing with Commander Laurel can get ridiculous. So when you first ride and stride into X-Gallop, normally if you rode a Force unit, you're sitting at 38k. Then if you call out Commander Laurel and you use Commander Laurel's skill, that puts him at 76k and a crit. And then all you need from that point is 4k more power in order to enable his restand. Before the Vieira support, being able to get first stride restand was basically impossible. Now it is something that we can do fairly consistently, and that is huge. So, and also on top of that, he's just a free +1 with an extra drive check. And then when you start comboing things like Reikas and stuff like that, you get to draw extra cards, and you can amass a huge amount of card advantage. And then he has a second ability, which is continuous on Vanguard Circle, Generation Break 3. He gets 10,000 power for each face-up card in your G-Zone. So generally, after your first stride, if you use Commander Laurel to double his power, from then on, you don't have to use Commander Laurel to get the restand ability, because you're generally at that threshold just from the face-up cards in your G-Zone alone. But he is good to add crit pressure, because it's a restanding Vanguard that is swinging for ungodly huge numbers, and it gains crits. So that's just something to note with this card. Like I said, this is your main stride. I run 4. I've seen some people run 3. But I have had actually quite a few games that go into very grindy attrition type of games where I've actually gone into all 4. And there's sometimes some games where you just prefer to go into this over something like your Generation Break 8. And that just makes the deck that much deadlier. Next up, I run 2 copies of Super Cosmic Hero X-Lead. X-Lead we don't really go into as a stride. He's generally in here as flip fodder for Bravest Peak, but there are times where you can't hit the threshold for Bravest Peak, or even for just the quad drive, or you can't even, or you just have no plays whatsoever. Going into X-Lead is not terrible. So for those of you who don't know, he has 2 skills. The first skill is an auto skill on Vanguard Circle. It says that when this unit's attack hits, if its power is 35,000 or greater, draw a card, and then if it's 40,000 or greater, choose one of your rearguards and stand it. So that's, first of all, it should be noted that on-hit effect is not Vanguard only. It can hit anything. You can swing at a rearguard, and if it hits, if you're at the power thresholds, you instantly get those effects. So the 35k draw will almost always be live as long as you ride a force unit with the force marker on your Vanguard before striding. That 40k threshold, very easy to hit, like I had mentioned with Bravest Peak. You run, was it 12 cards that allow you to buff your Vanguard. You have the Die Dragons, the Die Braves, and then the Rakas. So those are all good. And then plus he can also just boost him, and his power will be at that threshold. And then his second skill, which helps to enable the first skill, act Vanguard Circle once per turn. Choose a face-down card from your G-Zone and flip it face-up. And then that's the cost. And then you choose any number of your rearguards and rest them. And then for every rearguard you rest with him, he gains 4,000 power. So that's usually not relevant because you're hitting those power thresholds regardless. But it is good to like activate things like GB2. So if you do have to go into him first stride, you can just call something down and rest it. And then now he's swinging for 42 without a booster. And then also helps you hit power thresholds for things like Enigma Comb in your drop zone. So that can help you to recur those as well. And then, of course, if his attack does hit, because you're probably going to hit that 40,000 power threshold, he's going to let you restand that unit and swing in for more attacks. And it also be noted, because he does restand things, he's really good with things like Silbard. Because Silbard will always be swinging in with that extra crit, and then if you swing at, like, say, a rear guard, and then the attack hits, you get to restand the Silbard and then swing at your opponent's Vanguard, threatening even more damage. Next up, we run 2 copies of Dimensional Robo Command Chief Final Dimax. He's really not used that much. He's really only for like niche scenarios. That being said, though, there are some games where you can use him. Your main ride targets are Dimensional Robo, so you will have that hard effect. Worst case, he's just gaining 10k on himself in the middle row, and then threatening with a crit. Best case, you have double Die Dragon in the front row, and you have 2 30k attackers two 25k attackers with extra crits on them. And because we're running stand triggers, you can swing in with those, and then swing in with Dimax, and if you hit any stands, you can restand him. But generally, he's just in here for flip fodder, but he does have his uses. Just like X-Lead, mostly flip fodder, but has their uses. Next up, we have 1 copy of the GB8, Die King. I don't really go into him that much. He is a very good finisher, but against certain decks like Protect and everything, where they can literally just PG everything for days, he's not as good. So for those who don't know what he does, Generation Break 8. Jesus. Generation Break 8, when he attacks, he gains 10,000 power and a critical for each of your rear guards. And then at the end of the battle that he attacks, if his power is 80,000 or greater, all of your rear guards gain 10,000 power for each of his criticals. So, like I said before, you're almost always 38k when you stride. So when you swing in, if you have a full board, he becomes 88 by himself with 6 crit. So if it hits, your opponent just goes straight to dead. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. And then after that, everything just gains 60k. So your columns just gain 120k power, which is absolutely absurd. And he's pretty much a staple in kind of any Dimension Police deck just because of how strong of a finisher he is. Then we have 1 Zeroth Dragon of Destroy Star Stark. Stark is just ridiculous with the Commander Laurel. Because ultimate strides are 10k power more, his base that he's sitting at, instead of 38, if you have a force marker, is 48, and so then when you double it with Commander Laurel, he goes to 96 with an extra crit. That is absurd. Being able to swing 3 times with a Vanguard with an extra crit, and for swinging for almost 100k power, is insane. Really the only things that can fend this off are anything that can recur PGs, like it's their job. So like things like Shadow Paladin, and then, or Protect Clans, like OTT, where they just have PGs for days. But he's still a good option because you can just do some insane plays with him. Not to mention, he combos really well with Reika. So if you use a Reika on him, because you're swinging 3 times, each Reika you use becomes a +2 instead of a +1 for the restand with Bravest Peak. So that can help you kind of live if you fail to finish them with your Stark turn. And then also, that's another reason why we do run the Great Dayushas, is because if Stark fails to kill off your opponent, at least you have a backup plan. And I have won games with the backup plan because, things happen and your opponent just can't deal with multiple Vanguard swings regardless. So the last stride we run is just one tech copy of Sabreeze. It's primarily a flip flotter for Bravest Peak, but can have its uses if you want to tempo out. Really try not to go into this because the deck doesn't have a lot of countercharge options. So just burning away Counterblast for really no advantage isn't going to help you that much. So you're actually better off probably just staying at grade 3 and pressuring, like if you're on regular Dayusha, just pressuring with extra crits. So he's primarily just a flip fodder. So now moving on to the G Guardians, we have one Enigma Patriot, free 20k shield if your opponent gains 5k shield if your opponent attacking unit is 20k or greater. In this meta, everything gains power out the wazoo, so 9 times out of 10, this is always going to be a 20k shield. Now, you might be asking yourself, well, why would you just G-Guard with something that's 20k shield if you could just drop a regular heal against that attack? Well, you want to build up your GB as fast as possible because that allows your Bravest Peak to get as big as possible. I've had turns where I go in second stride and I'm swinging for almost 100. I'm swinging for like 150, 160k with an extra crit with Commander Laurel. That's just insane. So you'd actually much rather just use the generation guards to help build up your GB. And then next up, we have one Super Cosmic Hero X Caravu. X Caravu, when he's placed on Guardian Circle, if the attacking unit's power is 30k or greater, he gets 10,000 shield, so he becomes 25k shield. And then you can choose to discard a card from your hand, and if you do, until the end of turn, your Vanguard gets 4,000 power. That is very good because it allows you to be a 17k base on your opponent's turn. That is very, very relevant. Force clans are already hard to deal with enough as it is because of that extra 1,000 shield, or that extra 1,000 power that their Vanguard has. So being able to add more on top of that just makes it that much harder for your opponent to try and kill you. And it can be very relevant. Next, I run one copy of Gallant Incarnation Go5. So those of you who don't know what he does, when he's placed on Guardian Circle, he may Soul Blast a unit with 5,000 or greater power, and if you do, he gains 10,000 shield until the end of turn. And then if a card was put into your damage zone this turn, he gains an extra 5,000 shield. So he's Soul Blast 1 for 30k shield, so that's really good. Being able to hit 43k on defense is incredible. It's going to guard practically everything except probably a Vanguard swing, and even on Vanguard swings, it probably makes you at least a 2 to pass. So this is very solid. And then we have one copy here of Great Galactic Beast Zeal. So for those of you who don't know what he does, Soul Blast 1, when he's placed on Guardian Circle, he may pay the cost. If you do, choose one of your opponent's units, and he gets 5,000 power, minus 5,000 power until the end of the battle. And then if you have damage equal to or greater than your opponent, you may Counterblast 1, and if you do, your Vanguard gets 5,000 power for the rest of the turn. Again, like X Caravu, this is great. Giving extra power to your Vanguard is insane. I've actually had turns where I've gone into both this and X Caravu, and my Vanguard is sitting at 22k base on my opponent's turn. That's the equivalent of a Protect or an Excel clan hitting a defensive trigger. So that is just absolutely absurd, and it makes it that much harder to surmount my opponent. And because, again, this deck can go very all-in, being able to reduce how much you have to guard with is very, very helpful. And last but not least, we have one copy here of Oceanic Conversion Atlantis Dolphin. This is the Flip G-Guard. So those of you who don't know what he does, Auto GB1, when he's placed on the Guardian Circle, choose a face-down G-Guardian from your G-Zone and flip it face-up. And if you do, he gets 5,000 shield for each of your rear cards. Then, if his shield power is 30,000 or greater, Countercharge 1, Soul Charge 1. So this is one of the few, outside of the Countercharge or Soul Charge heals, this is one of the few ways that we actually have to get back some of our resources. The deck does commit to board very heavily, so this thing's almost always going to hit its threshold of 30k. And this one's just a free 30k as opposed to Go5 where you have to Soul Blast 1, and Soul Blast is very much an issue in the deck. So with him, if you do have a full board and your opponent doesn't have any sort of disruption or control or removal, then he's guarding for 40k. So this can very easily guard against pretty much anything. And what's nice with him too, he's one of the few flip G Guardians that never mind, he does have to be on when an opponent's Vanguard attacks, but he He's still a very good G Guardian. 40k shield is nothing to scoff at. That's generally going to make your Vanguard 3 to pass, unless your opponent has some insane power gain, or you're going up against another Force Clan. So that is my take on the Dimension Police deck in Premium. Like I said, this is absolutely one of my favorite decks to play, my favorite clan. I mean, it's the clan that got me into the game, so I mean, I do have a little personal bias, but I've been tweaking and testing it for all of those bad matchups that it has, and it's just, this deck is just so much fun to play and so much fun to pilot. And you know, if you guys have any questions, comments, concerns, suggestions, please let me know down in the comments below, and then I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can. Sometimes, you know, life does get in the way sometimes, so I apologize for people who've commented on my previous videos and I didn't get back to them right away. But yes, please, guys, let me know your thoughts, your opinions, and I will definitely take them into consideration. And so until then, I will catch you guys later.